The best of money matters. The Hot Seat.
Welcome to the Hot Seat, a debate segment where ideas clash and insights spark. I'm your host, Hongbin Jeong. Skibbity, you've just walked into a world where your favorite inspo isn't on Pinterest. It's in your group chat. Everyone's talking about their perfect look, and some are low-key delulu about the whole trad wife trend. Sounds chaotic? Or did anything I say make sense to you? Well, to be honest, I also have no idea what I just said. But looks like you can search up some of the words I've just used in the dictionary. Slang words like skibbity, inspo, look, delulu, or tradwife, they have been popularized by Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and they're spreading fast through social media, memes, and even professional settings. They're so popularized that the Cambridge University Press recently announced that those words, among the 6,000 entries, have been added to the online edition of the Cambridge Dictionary. According to the publisher, such words reflect on growing trends and how the internet culture is shaping the English language in ways both playful and serious. But should Gen Z slang like these be officially added to the dictionary? Or should dictionaries maintain a boundary between casual online language and the formal language used in professional and academic settings? Well, before we hear from our guests and dive deeper into this debate, here's a disclaimer. The views and arguments presented by our interviewees do not necessarily reflect their personal beliefs or opinions. Instead, they're here to provide a fresh perspective on the topic at hand. So without further ado, joining us today is Dr. Daniel Chan, who is the Senior Lecturer of French at the NUS Center for Language Studies and Assistant Dean of Undergraduate Studies at the NUS Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, to share with us why Gen Z language should be included in the dictionary. We also have Sascha Stollhans, who is the Professor of Language Education and Linguistics and Pro-Dean for Student Education of Faculty of Arts, Humanities, and Cultures at the University of Leeds, who will try to convince us otherwise. Welcome to the show, both.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, I mean, some say what's popular online is, just noise that fades quickly, right? So, Dr. Chan, just to start off our debate here, if internet slang is fleeting, doesn't adding it risk turning a dictionary into a trend log instead of a language resource?
Look at it this way. Language is a living entity, and we want to document how language evolves. So we want to be able to show at any point in time what words entered, were popular in the language. So imagine this. If we were to give a map of a city with just some of the newest roads erased,
right,
the map is totally useless.
Oh, okay.
So the dictionary should also have all these new items in them so that learners as well as references, people who use the dictionaries as a reference can see what the real picture is.
Okay, I mean, great analogy there with the maps and everything. Well, Professor Stollhans, then, isn't the purpose of the dictionary to document the language as it is? And if we choose to ignore Gen Z slang, aren't we denying the reality of how language has evolved, which should be reflected in the dictionary?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you're making there, but I think unfortunately there isn't a really simple or universal answer to this. But I think you're asking exactly the right question. What is the purpose of dictionaries? What is the purpose of dictionaries? I think there are actually many different purposes, and often it depends on the type of dictionary we're talking about, because no dictionary is like any other. So just to give you a very brief example, we can categorize dictionaries as either prescriptive or descriptive. So prescriptive means they tell us what might be appropriate style. Descriptive means they actually really represent the language as it is. And most dictionaries follow one specific approach. And then we have specialized dictionaries as well, like youth language dictionaries or learner dictionaries. So I think there's not an easy blanket answer to that. But I don't think any serious lexicographer, so the people who are behind dictionaries, would really take the stance that we should just ignore Gen Z slang or any variety of the language. But they always have to ask themselves, is this potential entry the right entry for my dictionary at this point in time, considering the purpose of my dictionary and my target audience? And the answer sometimes might be no, this specific slang word or word from a specific linguistic variety might not be included at this point in my specific dictionary.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, dictionaries are meant to guide learners of English to kind of help them explore new words, expand their vocabulary, and better understand their meanings and usage. Yet, critics point out that Gen Z slang like skibbity can mean cool, bad, or even nothing at all. Essentially, a word with no fixed meaning, right? So, Dr. Chan, if dictionaries are meant to guide learners of English, doesn't including such words risk confusing learners instead of actually helping them?
Well, if you think about it, instability is already found in the language. You have words that mean totally different things, like sanction. Sanction can be to allow something or to punish someone. Somebody who has left the building is not somebody who is left in the building. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there are words in English that have meanings that are not stable anyway. So what we want to do is to tell learners that these meanings exist and these meanings correspond to the different contexts of usage. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then, Professor Stollhans, but if this slang is already widely understood and even used by public figures, doesn't leaving them out of the dictionary also kind of ignore the reality of how people are speaking today?
Yeah, I suppose I would have a counter question there. If this is the case that a word is already widely understood and even used by public figures, to what extent is it still slang? What even is slang? So where does it start and where does it end? So I would probably argue that if a term is widely understood and even used by public figures, this is probably very good evidence that it has found its way into general language use. And that would be an argument for lexicographers to include it in even a general language dictionary. But if that's not the case yet, then the case might be a bit less clear, at least for a general language dictionary or for a learner's dictionary. And we do have more specialized dictionaries, like the famous Urban Dictionary, which is an online dictionary that specializes in slang. And it might be more appropriate for certain sort of words to be entered into this dictionary rather than in a general English language dictionary at some point in time.
Right. I mean, the Cambridge University Press, which publishes the dictionary, says it only adds words that have been deemed by linguists to show staying power. Now, Professor Stollhans, if we refuse to record the use of temporary words, doesn't this mean that we're also erasing an important part of language history? And if staying power is the only test, aren't we ignoring the overall value of short-lived words then?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're absolutely right that it's really important to record and document language change and different developments in any given language. But I would probably make 2 points here. The first one is that I don't think we really need to worry about forgetting slang words altogether. Words just don't fall out of fashion that quickly. And language change, while it is in some ways quite fast, overall it's a fairly slow process. Language evolves over time. The second point I would make is that dictionaries are only one tool we have to document language. They're an important tool, and I do not want to downplay their role. But there are many other ways we have to document language at a certain point in time. We have grammar books, we have academic articles that discuss certain phenomena, we have corpora, which are large collections of texts, we have literature, we have the media, we have internet. So I think dictionaries play a certain role, but they are not the be-all and end-all in documenting and recording language.
Right. Well, on the other hand here, Dr. Chan, if we were to add every trendy word, doesn't this risk cluttering the dictionary with terms that disappear in months? I mean, doesn't that undermine the dictionary's credibility then?
Of course, there has to be some kind of criteria before word gets entered. It has to have been around for a while, be used in several domains. Also, dictionary is meant to be like a teacher for a learner of the language. So if you think that the word is meant to be informal, it should be labeled as such so that learners can identify and know that these words are not meant to be used in the formal interviews, for example. Yeah, so that's basically my thought about this.
Okay, well, speaking of which, I mean, Gen Z slang has reached professional and political settings as well. In fact, the Australian Prime Minister used the word delulu, derived from the word delusional, in his parliamentary speech. So, Professor Stollhans, I mean, if such slangs are being used in professional and political settings, doesn't this justify its inclusion in the dictionary as a reflection of how the language is being used now?
I think this is just a fascinating example. The Australian Prime Minister used the word delulu with reference to his opposition, and he certainly did that for effect. So when politicians do that, it's usually a deliberate choice to appear a certain way. Sometimes they might just want to appeal to a younger audience. In this case, I think, though, the Australian Prime Minister probably just wanted to really intensify his mockery of the opposition by using this word that you wouldn't usually expect to be used in a political context, and the word that has certain connotations. Now, for us linguists, this is really fascinating. I'm not sure it's an argument to say that this word is now used generally by the general public or used in a professional or political setting. But I do agree that once a word reaches this point, it would probably be hard for lexicographers to make an argument against including it. And by the way, interesting point about the Cambridge Dictionary, which is a learner's dictionary. So actually the lexicographers here really thought this might be quite an important word for learners of English to be able to understand, especially if the Australian Prime Minister uses it. And I think this is a really fascinating topic and something I look at in my research as well, how linguistic diversity is represented in language teaching and learning. But it's these sort of decisions, and the point I'm trying to make is they're not always easy, and you really have to sort of like weigh up the arguments, and because you have restrictions within dictionaries.
Very interesting. I mean, Dr. Chan, even if such slang appears in professional context, though, doesn't their casual or informal nature raise concerns about whether they should be formally documented? I mean, shouldn't there be a distinction between language used casually online and the standards expected in professional settings?
And this brings me back to the point about labeling entries in the dictionary. We have to label dictionary entries as whether they are formally used, informally used in certain kind of context, whether they are slang locally found, like maybe in Singaporean English or other contexts. So labels are everything. They enable, learners are not stupid. They're able to identify which entries to use in what context.
Definitely. I mean, we've got great perspectives here. But before we end off here, I want to ask both of you, looking ahead 20 years, if the pace of slang keeps accelerating, what will the English dictionary of 2045 look like? I mean, where should the line be drawn on internet slang? Maybe Professor Stollhans, we can start off with you.
Yeah, that's a really, really fascinating question. One of the good things is that we have online dictionaries now rather than printed dictionaries. So you can imagine that printed dictionaries, it would be really hard to catch up with sort of like quite recent and quick developments within the language. And you can imagine the kind of decisions people who wrote those different dictionaries had to make and how restricted they were. But I think it will be really interesting to see how language develops further at a time where people really grow up without knowing a world without the internet, and now where artificial intelligence has become so accessible to all of us as well. So it will be interesting to see how that shapes the language, how that shapes slang, but also potentially what role artificial intelligence might play or not play in developing dictionaries of the future and in developing the slang of the future.
Definitely. I can't imagine how thick physical dictionaries would be if we kept adding slang words into physical copies as well. But Dr. Chan, what are your thoughts? I mean, what would the English dictionary of 2045 look like?
Well, we're forgetting that now with the age of AI, the updates of dictionaries gets more and more accelerates, right? Because nowadays we just scan text online and billions of text get scanned to see what are the words that are most salient. So with this, dictionaries will be able to capture, the current state of the language more easily and quicker. And therefore we will have, online dictionaries. The advantage of online dictionaries is that you can actually filter out words that are, let's say, slang. And so if the learners want to only see the words that they want to use formally or in proper English context, they can just filter out those words. It's like, in Google Map, you can filter out those roads that are just side roads and only see the main roads, right? So in the same way, this is how dictionaries will be in 2045.
Some great insights from both of you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. We've been speaking to Dr. Daniel Chan, who is a senior lecturer of French at the NUS Center for Language Studies and assistant dean of undergraduate studies at the NUS Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, as well as Sascha Stollhans, who's a professor of language education and linguistics and pro-dean for student education of Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Cultures at University of Leeds. Thank you so much for those who tuned in on air as well. Tune in again next week for another Hot Seat. I've been your host, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.